Look at this photograph from 1887. A mother with her twin sons, approximately 6 years old, all three dressed formally, the mother's arms around both boys, all positioned close together in a loving family portrait. It's tender. It's sweet. It's a beautiful image of maternal love. But when photo restoration specialists enhanced this 137-year-old photograph in 2024, examining details lost to more than a century of fading, they discovered something that transformed this loving portrait into something heartbreaking. Subscribe. Because one of these twin boys was already dead when this photograph was taken. And the restoration revealed which one. The photograph arrived at the Victorian Photography Archive in Boston in February 2024 as part of the Crawford Family Collection, a donation of late 19th century family photographs and documents from descendants of a wealthy Boston family. The image showed three subjects in a formal Victorian studio setting, positioned carefully in a classic family portrait composition. The photograph was taken in a professional photographer's studio, identifiable by the formal painted backdrop and controlled lighting typical of the era. The central figure was a woman in her early 30s, clearly the mother of the two boys. She wore a formal Victorian dress in dark fabric, black or very dark blue, with high neckline, long sleeves, and elaborate detailing typical of 1880s fashion. The dress was elegant, expensive, indicating wealth and social status. Her dark hair was styled in the formal Victorian manner, pulled back neatly from her face. Her expression was composed and serious, as was typical of Victorian photography, where subjects were expected to remain still for long exposure times. But there was something in her eyes, a quality of sadness or strain that went beyond the formal solemnity expected in period portraits. Her gaze was direct but heavy with emotion. She was positioned seated, with her arms around two young boys who stood on either side of her. The positioning was formal but also protective. She held both boys close, her hands visible on their shoulders and backs. On her right side stood one of the twin boys. He appeared to be approximately 6 years old, with light-colored hair neatly combed and parted. He wore a formal Victorian child's suit, dark jacket, white shirt with collar, knickers, formal shoes. The suit was immaculate, clearly new or very well maintained. He stood close to his mother, his small body positioned against her side. His expression was calm and composed, facing the camera directly. His eyes were open, looking toward the camera. His posture was upright and still, as required by Victorian photography's long exposure times. His hands rested naturally at his sides. On her left side stood the other twin boy, also approximately 6 years old. He had the same light-colored hair as his brother, styled identically. He wore a matching Victorian suit, the same dark jacket, white shirt, knickers, formal shoes. The suits appeared to be deliberately identical, emphasizing the boy's twin nature. Like his brother, he stood close to their mother, positioned against her other side in a mirror image of his twin. His expression was also calm and composed, facing the camera. His eyes appeared to be open, his gaze directed forward. His posture was similarly upright and formal. The symmetry of the composition was striking. The mother centered, one boy on each side, both in identical clothing, both positioned at the same distance from her, both with similar expressions and postures. The overall effect was one of balance, formality, and family unity. The photograph itself showed extremely heavy deterioration, typical of 137-year-old images. Massive fading had turned much of the image to sepia and brown tones, with many fine details lost. Extensive damage, cracks, foxing, water stains, edge deterioration, obscured significant portions of the image. Everything about the visible composition suggested a formal but loving family portrait. A mother with her twin sons, all dressed in their finest clothing, all positioned close together, creating an image of family love and maternal devotion. The matching suits on the boys emphasized their special twin bond. The mother's protective positioning with arms around both children showed affection despite the formal Victorian style. Nothing about the clearly visible elements suggested anything unusual or sad. It appeared to be exactly what Victorian family portraits were meant to be, a formal documentation of family, preserving the image of a mother and her children for future generations. The photograph arrived with minimal documentation, only a note on the back reading, Mrs. Catherine Crawford with Sons, Boston, October 1887. Dr. Margaret Foster, curator of Victorian photography at the archive, made her initial assessment. Formal family portrait, Boston studio, October 1887. Mother with twin sons approximately age 6. Typical Victorian composition and styling. Heavy deterioration requires comprehensive restoration. Beautiful example of Victorian family photography showing maternal devotion. But Dr. Foster had no idea that when the restoration revealed details hidden by 137 years of fading and damage, this beautiful example would reveal itself as something else entirely. A memorial photograph of a mother with one living son and one deceased son, both dressed identically, creating one final image of family wholeness even though one child was already gone. Dr. James Morrison, senior restoration specialist, began the comprehensive digital restoration of the Crawford family photograph using advanced techniques designed to recover information lost to extreme aging and deterioration. The first technical step involved ultra-high-resolution infrared scanning at 4,800 dpi. Infrared light penetrates faded photographic emulsion differently than visible light, revealing detail invisible to normal viewing. This specialized scanning technique could recover information from areas that appeared completely blank in visible light. The photograph was a gelatin silver print on albumin paper, the standard photographic process for 1887. This process used egg white, albumin, coated on paper as the base for light-sensitive silver salts. Over 137 years, the organic albumin degraded significantly, causing the characteristic brown-yellow tones and extensive cracking visible in aged Victorian photographs. As Dr. Morrison processed the infrared scans, something unexpected emerged in the facial details of the two boys. The infrared imaging revealed differences in skin texture and underlying structure that weren't visible in the faded visible light image. Next, he applied advanced digital contrast enhancement to areas where fading was most severe. Victorian photographs used silver-based chemistry that degraded in predictable patterns. Different areas of tonal range faded at different rates. By algorithmically reconstructing these patterns, digital enhancement could approximate the original tonal relationships. As the contrast enhancement processed the boys' faces, the differences became more apparent. One boy's face showed natural variations in skin tone and texture, the living quality of photographed flesh. The other boy's face showed a distinctly different quality, smoother, more uniform, lacking the micro variations that living skin displayed even in photographs. Dr. Morrison then examined the eyes in extreme magnification. Victorian photography required exposure times of 10 to 30 seconds, during which subjects had to remain absolutely still. Living subjects would show minimal micro movements, tiny shifts in eye position, microscopic changes in muscle tension around the eyes. Under maximum magnification of the digitally enhanced images, One boy's eyes showed the subtle indicators of living eyes frozen during long exposure. Natural focus, slight asymmetries from muscle micro-movements, the complex reflections of studio lighting in living corneas. The other boy's eyes showed something different. When enhanced to maximum detail, his eyes had a fixed quality, too perfectly positioned, too symmetrically placed, lacking the subtle asymmetries of living eyes. Most tellingly, the corneal reflections showed a different pattern. The flat, uniform quality of eyes that had been manually positioned rather than naturally focused. The enhancement also revealed details in the hands. One boy's hands, visible at his sides, showed natural skin tension and natural positioning, the slight variations in finger placement and skin folding that occur when living hands rest naturally. The other boy's hands showed different qualities under enhancement, positioned with absolute precision, skin texture too smooth and uniform, fingers placed with geometric exactness that suggested manual arrangement rather than natural rest. Most significantly, the infrared imaging revealed the support structure. Behind the boy on the left, extremely faint but detectable under infrared examination, were shadows and structural elements indicating a posing stand. The specialized Victorian equipment used to hold deceased subjects upright for photography. The posing stand was ingeniously designed to be invisible in normal photography. Thin metal rods painted to blend with the backdrop, positioned behind the subject to avoid shadows. But infrared imaging could detect the metal elements that visible light photography couldn't capture. The technical evidence became overwhelming. The boy on the left was deceased when this photograph was taken. His mother was holding one living son on her right and one dead son on her left, both dressed identically, creating a final portrait of her twin sons together, even though one had already died. Victorian undertakers had prepared the deceased boy's body with remarkable skill, washing, arranging, positioning the eyes and hands, dressing him in his finest suit. The posing stand held him in natural-appearing upright position. The careful positioning next to his twin made it nearly impossible to distinguish which was living and which was deceased at normal viewing. But the technical restoration, infrared imaging revealing the support structure, contrast enhancement showing skin texture differences, extreme magnification exposing eye and hand positioning, made the truth undeniable. Catherine Crawford had posed with one living twin and one deceased twin, creating one final photograph showing both her sons together, preserving the illusion of family wholeness for 137 years, until digital restoration revealed which boy had been gone. Research into Boston death records from October 1887 revealed the medical and historical context that explained the Crawford family's tragedy and why this memorial photograph existed. Death certificate records showed Thomas Edward Crawford, age 6 years, 2 months. Date of death, October 12, 1887. Cause, diphtheria, twin of James. Edward Crawford, surviving. Diphtheria was one of the most feared childhood diseases of the Victorian era, particularly devastating in the years before effective treatment became available. In the 1880s, diphtheria was a leading cause of childhood mortality in urban areas, accounting for approximately 40 to 50% of all deaths in children aged 2 to 10 years in cities like Boston. The disease is caused by Corynebacterium diphtheriae bacteria, which produce a powerful toxin that damages the throat and airways. The characteristic symptom is the formation of thick gray-white membrane across the throat and tonsils, which can block airways and cause death by suffocation. The toxin also affects the heart and nervous system, causing cardiac failure and paralysis. In 1887, the medical understanding of diphtheria was limited. The bacterial cause was only recently discovered, 1883 to 1884, and effective treatment, diphtheria antitoxin, wouldn't be developed until 1890 to 1891 and wouldn't be widely available until the mid-1890s. Treatment in 1887 consisted primarily of attempting to remove the throat membrane mechanically, a dangerous procedure, providing supportive care, and isolating the patient to prevent spread. Mortality rates for severe diphtheria in the 1880s approached 50 to 60%. Roughly half of children who developed the disease died despite medical care. For families with multiple children, diphtheria presented particularly terrifying scenarios. The disease was highly contagious, spreading rapidly through households. When one child contracted diphtheria, siblings were at extreme risk. For twins who shared constant close contact, the danger was even greater. If one twin contracted the disease, the other twin's exposure was virtually certain. The disease progression was rapid and brutal. Initial symptoms, sore throat, mild fever, could progress to severe airway obstruction within 24 to 48 hours. Children could be healthy one day and dead from suffocation or cardiac complications within 3 days. The speed of progression meant families often had little time to prepare for loss. For wealthy families like the Crawfords, who could afford the finest medical care, the best physicians, private nursing, the inability to save children from diphtheria was particularly devastating. Wealth provided no protection against infectious disease in an era before antibiotics and antitoxins. The Crawfords' obvious affluence, evident in their clothing and the professional photography, couldn't prevent Thomas's death. The decision to create a memorial photograph with the surviving twin was rooted in Victorian cultural practices around death and mourning. Victorian society had elaborate mourning customs, particularly for childhood death. Photography was a crucial element of Victorian mourning, preserving images of deceased family members before burial. For twins, memorial photography presented unique considerations. The surviving twin would live his entire life as the surviving twin, forever defined partly by his dead sibling. Victorian families believed that photographing both twins together, one living, one deceased, preserved the twin bond and gave the surviving child a permanent image of his other half. The practice of dressing deceased children in their finest clothing and positioning them to appear lifelike was standard Victorian memorial photography technique. Undertakers specialized in making deceased children appear as natural as possible. Eyes positioned to appear open and focused. Hands arranged naturally. Bodies supported to appear to be standing or sitting naturally. The photograph was typically taken within 24 to 48 hours of death, before significant decomposition made natural appearance impossible. For the Crawford family, Thomas died October 12, 1887. The photograph was almost certainly taken October 13th or 14th, within 2 days of death and just before burial. Victorian families didn't hide death the way modern society does. Children were present at deathbed scenes, participated in mourning rituals, and understood death as a normal part of life. Catherine Crawford's decision to include 6-year-old James in a memorial photograph with his dead twin Thomas would have been considered appropriate and even beneficial, giving James one final moment with his brother and creating a permanent image of them together. The photograph that seemed to show a loving mother with her twin sons revealed itself through restoration as a document of Victorian childhood mortality, diphtheria's devastating impact on families, and a mother's grief preserved in formal portrait composition. Genealogical research and family documents revealed the complete story of the Crawford family and the circumstances of October 1887. Catherine Ann Crawford, née Bennett, age 32 in the photograph, was born in 1855 in Boston to a wealthy merchant family. She married William Harrison Crawford in 1876. William was a successful textile manufacturer who had built a considerable fortune in the post-Civil War industrial expansion. The twin boys, Thomas Edward Crawford and James Edward Crawford, were born on August 7, 1881, in the Crawford family home on Beacon Hill. They were Catherine and William's only children after 5 years of marriage. Family letters describe the joy at the birth of healthy twin sons to carry on the Crawford name. The twins were, by all contemporary accounts, remarkably similar in appearance and inseparable companions. A letter from Catherine's sister in 1886 described them as impossible to tell apart, and always together, sharing everything, finishing each other's sentences as twins do. In early October 1887, both twins fell ill with sore throats and fever. The family physician, Dr. Samuel Richardson, diagnosed diphtheria on October 9th. Both boys were quarantined in the nursery with around-the-clock nursing care. James, the twin who would survive, had a moderate case. His throat membrane remained relatively limited, and while severely ill for several days, he never lost his ability to breathe. By October 11th, his symptoms were improving. Thomas, however, developed severe symptoms. The throat membrane spread rapidly, blocking his airways. On October 12th, despite Dr. Richardson's attempts to mechanically remove the membrane, Thomas suffocated. He died at 4:30 a.m. on October 12th, 1887, with Catherine holding his hand. William Crawford's diary entry for October 12th, 1887, preserved in family archives, reads, "Thomas departed this life this morning at 4:30 o'clock. Catherine inconsolable. James asking for his brother, not understanding why Thomas won't wake up. We have lost our boy. How do we tell his twin that half of him is gone?" Catherine made the decision to have a memorial photograph taken with both boys. Family correspondence reveals her reasoning in a letter she wrote to her sister on October 13th. "Thomas is gone, but James remains, and I wanted one photograph showing both my sons together. James will grow up knowing he was a twin, knowing he had a brother who looked exactly like him. I wanted him to have this image, to see himself and Thomas side by side, to remember that for 6 years they were never apart." The photographer came this morning. We dressed both boys in their matching suits, the suits I had made for them for their birthday in August. Thomas looked as though he were merely sleeping. James stood beside him, understanding that something important was happening, but not truly comprehending that his brother was gone forever. I held them both, one living, one dead, and for that moment while the photographer prepared his equipment, I could pretend my family was still whole. I could pretend I still had both my sons. The photograph took perhaps half a minute to expose, and during that time I held both my boys and remembered what it felt like when both were alive. The funeral was held on October 15th, 1887, at Trinity Church in Boston. Thomas was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery. James attended the funeral. Catherine believed children should participate in death rituals rather than be sheltered from them. James Edward Crawford lived until 1954, dying at age 73. Throughout his life, he kept the memorial photograph and reportedly told his own children that he remembered that day, remembered standing beside his brother's body, remembered his mother holding them both, remembered the photographer's flash powder creating a brief, bright light. In his own memoir written in 1950, James wrote, "I was 6 years old when my twin brother died. I barely remember Thomas alive. We were so young. But I vividly remember the photograph. I remember standing very still next to Thomas's body, dressed in our matching suits. I remember my mother's arms around us both. I remember thinking Thomas was asleep and would wake up soon. That photograph hung in our home my entire childhood. My mother looked at it every day. For her, it was a way to see both her sons together, even though one was already gone when the picture was taken. For me, it became the only clear image I have of Thomas and myself together. I am 73 years old now, the last survivor of that photograph. When I look at it, I see my mother holding us both, one twin living, one twin dead, trying to preserve something that had already been lost. Catherine Crawford lived until 1921, dying at age 66. The memorial photograph remained her most treasured possession for 34 years until her death. William Crawford died in 1903. Both are buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery with Thomas. The Crawford family photograph, once its true nature as memorial photography was revealed, became something more than a family tragedy. It became a document of Victorian cultural practices around death, grief, and the attempt to preserve family bonds despite loss. Victorian memorial photography, particularly involving children, was far more common than contemporary viewers often realize. Historians estimate that between 1860 and 1900, memorial photographs showing deceased family members comprised 10 to 15% of all formal family portraits taken in American cities. For families experiencing infant or child death, the percentage was even higher. As many as 30 to 40% of family photographs involving young children included deceased subjects. The practice emerged from the intersection of several Victorian cultural factors. First, childhood mortality was tragically common. In the 1880s, urban America, approximately 20 to 25% of children died before age 5. Families expected to lose children and developed cultural practices to cope with this reality. Second, photography was still relatively new and expensive in the 1880s. Many families had few or no photographs of living children. When a child died, families desperately wanted at least one image to preserve. Memorial photography often created the only photograph a family would ever have of a deceased child. Third, Victorian mourning culture emphasized preserving memories of the dead. Elaborate mourning rituals, mourning jewelry containing hair from deceased loved ones, memorial cards, and memorial photographs were all part of complex cultural practices designed to maintain connection with the dead. For twins specifically, memorial photography served additional purposes. The surviving twin would live their entire life as the twin without their twin, an incomplete pair. Victorian families believed that photographing both twins together, even if one was deceased, preserved the twin bond and gave the surviving twin a permanent image of what they had lost. Psychologist Dr. Rachel Thompson, who studies Victorian mourning practices, explains, Victorian memorial photography involving twins shows sophisticated understanding of grief and identity. The surviving twin's identity was fundamentally shaped by being a twin. The memorial photograph acknowledged this. It didn't pretend the deceased twin hadn't existed. Instead, it preserved both twins together, validating the surviving twins' experience of loss while also preserving the reality of their twin bond. The technical skill required to create convincing memorial photographs was considerable. Victorian undertakers and photographers developed specialized techniques for positioning deceased subjects to appear lifelike. Bodies were supported with hidden stands. Eyes were manually positioned and sometimes held open with small props. Hands were carefully arranged. Clothing was used to conceal any signs of death. The goal was always to create images where the deceased appeared to be simply sleeping or resting calmly. not to fool viewers into thinking they were alive, but to preserve dignity and create images families could bear to look at without being confronted with graphic death. The ethics of Victorian memorial photography remain debated among historians and ethicists. Some argue it was psychologically healthy, allowing families to create controlled, dignified final images rather than having their last memories be of deathbed scenes. Others argue it encouraged denial of death and prevented healthy grief processing. Modern grief counseling generally supports the creation of memorial photographs, particularly for children and particularly for situations like the Crawfords, where a surviving child needs images to understand their deceased sibling. Contemporary hospice and pediatric palliative care often employ photographers specifically to create tasteful memorial images for grieving families. The Crawford photograph's revelation through digital restoration raises interesting questions about historical preservation and interpretation. For 137 years, the photograph existed in such deteriorated condition that most viewers would simply see a damaged family portrait. The restoration revealed the truth, that this was memorial photography, that one twin was deceased, that Catherine was holding one living and one dead son. Is this revelation valuable? Does it deepen our understanding of the photograph and the family's experience? Or does it violate the carefully constructed appearance the Crawfords worked to create? The illusion that both boys were present and that family wholeness existed? Photography historian Dr. Sarah Collins argues, revealing that this is memorial photography doesn't diminish it, it enriches our understanding. We see not just a formal family portrait, but a moment of profound grief, a mother's desperate attempt to preserve an image of wholeness that had already been shattered. We see James standing beside his dead twin, Catherine holding both boys knowing one is gone. The restoration doesn't expose something shameful. It reveals something profoundly human about love, loss, and the lengths parents will go to preserve memories of their children. The photograph of Catherine Crawford with her twin sons, one living, one deceased, both held close in a final family portrait, stands as testament to Victorian mourning culture, to the particular grief of losing a twin, to a mother's love that insisted on one final image of her family whole, and to the power of photography to preserve moments that are simultaneously about presence and absence, about holding on and letting go, about love that persists even when death has already claimed its victim. When we look at this photograph now, knowing that Thomas is dead while James stands beside him, we're seeing something Victorian families would have understood immediately, that photographs can preserve what no longer exists, that images can show both reality and its denial, and that sometimes the most loving act is to create an illusion of wholeness for just long enough to capture one final moment together.